I was struck this week as I was preparing this message and I was studying for this message. And quite frankly, I'm still amazed by the fact that we're hitting this place in this gospel right now. And you'll see why I'm saying that in a moment. But why we're hitting this place in the gospel at this moment in history, with all of the things that are going on around us, in the news. Everything from Charlie Kirk to Jimmy Kimmel, these shootings that are happening, the shooting at the ICE facility the other day, the stuff just coming out last night I'm seeing in Portland, all these things going on, and all the politics and the infighting going on right in the middle of it. And and at this point in history, we come to this part of the Gospel of John. You may wonder sometimes if the Bible speaks into what we're seeing out there. If the Bible has anything to say or any encouragement to help us process the things we're seeing and make sense of all of this commotion and all of this arguing and all of this infighting, and this person's lying, no, you're lying, no, you're, and all of this back and forth. Does the Bible speak into any of this? My answer is yes, absolutely it does. Absolutely it does, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it play out. We're going to see it play out today. One of the amazing facts about the Bible is that it is always relevant. It is never outdated. It is timeless. It is never obsolete. It is never out of touch. The truth that it teaches does not expire. Truth is truth, and truth is always truth. Absolutely. So get this. Let me just give you a quick rundown of what you're going to see today. In today's story, a man by the name of Jesus, he tries to have an honest dialogue with a bunch of people who are hostile towards him. And as he is trying to have this honest dialogue, in love, he tries to show them the error of their ways. And he tries to lovingly correct them. And he tries to lay out a rational argument for why he is saying these things and to support his beliefs. But the people listening to him, rather than hearing what he's actually saying, this is what they do. They get hung up on individual words and phrases that he's using. And they miss all of his points because they're only hearing these key words. Then they choose to disregard everything he says that does not fit with what they have already told themselves in their heads that they believe. And they refuse to consider new ideas. So they disregard his new ideas. Finally, when all else fails, they start labeling him. They start calling him names. They start attacking his character. And when all else fails, when he still doesn't back down, they decide to kill him. Now, does any of that sound relevant or familiar? Okay, so today I want to encourage you with the fact that those who do such things, those who choose to refuse and respond to truth as Jesus defines it, are going to end up on the wrong side of history. They're going to end up there. And we're going to see 3 warnings to prevent that from happening to you. I'm going to present 3 warnings today to you. If you haven't done so already, would you please flip with me to the Gospel of John, chapter 8, beginning in verse 12. We're going to be reading the entirety of the rest of the chapter today. But we're going to start by reading, we're going to take it in chunks. We're going to start with verse 12 down through verse 30. So would you please read with me? John chapter 8, verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself. Your testimony is not true. Jesus answered, even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I come from and where I'm going. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Yet, even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of two people is true. I am the one who bears witness about myself, and the Father who sent me bears witness about me. They said to him, therefore, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you know me, you would know my Father also. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple. But no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. So he said to them again, I am going away, and you will seek me, and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. So the Jews said, will he kill himself, since he says, where I am going, you cannot come? He said to them, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins. Let me back up to the beginning of verse 24. I told you that you would die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. So they said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, just what I have been telling you from the beginning. I have much to say about you and much to judge, but he who sent me is true, and I declare to the world that I have heard from him. They did not understand that he had been speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. And he who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him. As he was saying these things, many believed in him. So, you have probably noticed that a lot of times when you'll see two people speaking, or you're a part of a conversation, when someone is trying to explain something to somebody, a lot of times the person doing the listening will get so caught up in individual words or individual phrases or choices of words that they hear that, and they'll get so caught up on those words that they miss the point of actually what the person was trying to say, because they just zero in on this one word that you said or something like that. Well, I call that missing the message for the words. Missing the message for the words. So the first warning I have to you today is, if you miss the message for the words, you will end up on the wrong side of history. So in verses 12 through 30, we're seeing this play out in real time. In verses 12 through 30, we see the back and forth debate between Jesus and these Pharisees, and we see Jesus trying to explain to them about his divine mission and about the fact that he has been sent on this mission. You're going to see multiple references through this text about Jesus saying how he was sent. He was sent. I was sent. The one who sent me. Constant references to this. He's trying to explain his divine mission, but these Pharisees who are supposed to be listening to him, as usual, they're not getting it. And there's a bunch of reasons they're not getting it. The first one, again, is they're hanging on these individual words, and they keep asking him irrelevant questions, like, well, who is your father? Where's your father? You know, because they're not understanding what he's actually talking about. Well, where's your father? Who are you? Is he going to kill himself? They're asking irrelevant questions that really don't get to the point of what he's saying. But they're losing him because they're hanging on these words, all because they're not really listening. They're doing what people today do. They're doing what I have seen a lot of people in recent weeks doing. They're hanging up on these individual words. You know, it's kind of like in today's culture when everybody's like, well, where's the soundbite? Where's the soundbite that I can use? How can I take this 20-minute video clip and truncate it down to 15 seconds, but just the 15 seconds that focuses on a word or a phrase that I want the people who listen to me to hear, and then put that out there. That's the kind of mindset here, you know, which is really sad. It's really sad because this whole encounter starts, as usual, Because Jesus loved these people who hate him. He loved them so much that he's engaging them in this way because he wants to rescue them from a predicament that they don't even know they're in. They don't even know the hopelessness they've gotten themselves into, and he's trying to pull them out of it, and they hate him so much that they can't even see that. And that's really the irony here. So they're twisting his words in all these crazy ways. Jesus says in verse 12, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. That is a very famous line right there. Jesus is the light of the world. But what I need to stress here is Jesus is saying this for their benefit, not his. He's saying this for them. He's trying to save them. You know, that's the thing about the people who walk in lies. If you walk in lies long enough, you start to see the truth as a threat to you. After a time, you can't even handle, you know, when you encounter the truth. And then they start to mistake the truth for hatred, and they start to mistake the truth for bigotry. I read in a commentary this week as I was preparing for this sermon, just this one little quote that I just really appreciated. Just this guy said, there are none so blind as those who will not see. The blindest people around us are the ones who choose not to see. But that's the thing about light. And let me just point this out. That's the thing about light. Is I don't have to come up with some compelling argument to prove to you that that's light. I don't need to convince you that these light sources you see coming in through the windows and hanging above us on the ceiling that's light. I don't have to argue to prove that. I just have to let it shine. It proves itself in the shining. So pay attention to the fact that verse 20 said that this whole exchange is taking place in the treasury of the temple. If you look at verse 20, it says it's taking place in the treasury. Please don't make the mistake of thinking that this is some like back office in some back hallway somewhere inside the temple. You know, it's some administrative office somewhere in that's not what the treasury was. The treasury was an area. You remember how Jesus is always teaching in these outer courts of the temple? The treasury is an area in one of the outer courts of the temple. It's an outdoor court. And the only reason it's called the treasury is because that's where the offering boxes were for the people to come up and bring their offerings. So if you were coming to pay, such as the temple tax, or if you were coming to make a particular peace offering or sin offering or something like that, and you were going to donate money, you could make your offering there. So it was called the treasury. And the thing about the treasury is it's the most visited area of the temple. It gets a lot of foot traffic. A lot of people are always going through there. And this is where Jesus has set up shop, and they're having this conversation. And the reason I'm pointing that out is if you think back to John chapter 7, the backdrop of John chapter 7 was the Feast of Tabernacles. You remember we made a big deal about it being the Feast of Tabernacles. Well, during the Feast of Tabernacles, this is key here, because this court Jesus is in, by this treasury area, this court would have been lit up. They set up all these candle stands everywhere, and they lit them. And so you have all these flames burning, lighting up this whole court. And the reason they did that, remember, the Feast of Tabernacles was a commemoration of God's deliverance. Well, they lit these fires as a commemoration of the pillar of fire in the book of Exodus, when God led the people through the wilderness to where they needed to go. They followed that to get where they needed to go. And so all these candles are lit. The whole thing is lit up, and it's commemorating that. Now, today, we have electric lights. It's never really dark. We have street lights. We have city lights. We have lights everywhere. We don't really, when we think of fire, we don't think of fire the same way they did. We don't think of fire in these terms at all. But in Jesus' day, fire provided much needed light in times of darkness. Fire was something that lit your path. Fire was something that showed you the way you were supposed to go. That's what fire was to them. So they would have gotten used to seeing all these flames burning. And then as soon as the Feast of Tabernacles was over, all of those candles are going to be extinguished. And if you've gotten used to all this light, all of a sudden the darkness, the dimness, the darkness, you're going to notice that. You're going to notice it's noticeably less bright. And it's against that backdrop, with all of that missing light, that Jesus stands up and says, I am the light of the world. I am. But not just the light of Israel, like the pillar of flame in the book of Exodus, the light of the entire world. Jesus came to light the way and to show the way for everybody. He came for everybody, not just Israel. And so this is a very huge statement for him to be making. This is a huge statement for him to be making in front of these people, and it's too bad they missed it. It's too bad they had no idea what he was talking about. They get hung up on the false idea that Jesus is bearing testimony about himself. And they're like, oh, you're just bearing testimony about yourself. Which, even if that's true, it doesn't make what he's saying false. It just means it's inadmissible in court. If you were going to bring a trial, a case against somebody, and you were going to provide witnesses, we talked about this last week too, you would typically need multiple witnesses to establish a charge. So one person bearing witness, it just wouldn't be admissible testimony in a court, but it doesn't mean it's false. So they're saying, no, you're just bearing testimony about yourself. And then Jesus tries to make them see in verse 14 that just because they don't want to hear it doesn't make it false. Just because they're trying to look for ways to disregard it doesn't make it false. However, all that being said, he does have another witness. So their point's moot to begin with. The Father himself. That's where he brings the Father into it. But again, they get hung up on his choice of words. All they hear is that word Father. They can't process what his message is and what he's actually talking about. They just get caught up on this word Father and not understanding that he means the Father in heaven. So they say, where is he? Bring him out. Yeah, I'd like to see that. Jesus bringing out God the Father, to which Jesus replies in verse 19. He's like, you don't know him. You don't know him, guys. If you knew him, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. That's the gist of his answer there. And so another big misunderstanding then comes in verse 21 when Jesus says, I am going away and you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. And again, they miss the message for the words. They're not listening for the message. They're picking apart individual words. And they're like, is he going to kill himself? What does he mean we can't go where he's going? So Jesus tries again. He tries again. He's so patient with them. Even when he seems like he's losing his cool, he's so patient with them. He tells them in verse 24 that they are in real danger of dying in their sins if they don't get this. He's like, guys, you have no idea how much is riding on this. You're going to die in your sins if you don't listen to me. And that's why they can't get where. That's why he said you can't go where I'm going, because he knows where he's going. He's going back to his Father soon, and he knows if they don't change course, if they don't change paths, if they don't get this, they're going to die in their sins, and they're not going to go where he's going. They can't get there, and he's trying to tell them this. He's trying to help them out. But if they die in their sin, that's it. That's it. There's no hope for them. And about that point, let me just stress this. The finality of judgment is real. Okay? The finality of judgment is real. God is patient. God is kind. God is compassionate. God is understanding. God is loving. But anyone who refuses to place their faith and their trust in Jesus Christ for salvation has a very dark future ahead of them. There's no do-overs once it ends. The finality is real. And he's giving them a very bleak warning here. Like, you guys have no idea how much is riding on this. You have to get this. And they're sitting there picking apart his words. John Phillips, who is a Bible commentator that I really, really like, and I study his books a lot in my sermon prep time, he has this great quote about this. This great quote. And this is what he has to say. He says, "The passport to heaven is Christ. He alone can save men and women from their sins. Now pay attention to this last part. This part is like, man, sin has wrecked and ruined this world, and God has no intention of allowing it to wreak its havoc in his. So he's like, there's a cutoff. There's a cutoff. And so another irony of this passage is they were just asking Jesus, they were just asking about Jesus, is he going to kill himself? Is he going to kill himself? When the real irony is they're literally on the verge of committing spiritual suicide themselves. And they think he's talking about him committing suicide. And they don't get it. They're about to end up on the wrong side of history because they missed the message for the words. But that's not the only reason. We also see, as we move into verses 31 through 47, we see that if you reject truth in favor of uninformed opinions, you will end up on the wrong side of history. So let's pick up where we left off. We're going to read verses 31 through 47. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We're offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?" Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, yet you seek to kill me, because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have heard from your father." They answered him, "Abraham is our father." Jesus said to them, "If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works your father did." They said to him, "We were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God." Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me. For I came from God and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you are not of God." Big, big, bold words there. So, at the end of that last section, I didn't zero in on it. I didn't zone in on it there, but I am now. At the very end of that last section, we saw this line that many were starting to believe in Jesus. I don't know if you caught that there. Many spoke of, many were starting to believe in Jesus. And right before that, leading into that, Jesus had spoken of being lifted up. He said, when the Son of Man is lifted up, then a bunch of you are gonna know the truth. And what he was referring to there, it was his crucifixion, when they literally hoist him up and put him on the cross, and how after his death, then they would know, many of them would come to know the truth after that fact. But then we got that statement in verse 30 saying many were starting to believe in him. And, we've seen lines like that before. So in and of itself, that's not too shocking. But the crazy part here, the crazy part, the part that I find kind of nuts, is that we're probably talking about Pharisees here, not Jewish people, not regular Jewish people. We're probably talking about actual Pharisees. Notice and pay attention, you'll see this now that I'm pointing it out, there's absolutely no mention of a crowd at all anywhere in this story anywhere in this entire chapter. In John chapter 7 that we just came out of, there were eight different references to the crowd. The crowd did this, the crowd did that, the crowd said this. There were all these references. John, the gospel writer, is not going to use the word crowd again until chapter 11. There's no mention of a crowd anywhere in this chapter or in this section. As far as we know, the only people in this group right now are Jesus and a whole bunch of Pharisees. They're the only people he ever mentions, which if we take that at face value, that would mean that there are actual Pharisees starting to believe, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. If you think about all the things we know about the Pharisees, this thought that maybe he's starting to get through to some of them. I mean, that's actually kind of crazy. Here's the thing, though. As we continue moving through this chapter, what we're going to see is that this belief of theirs was very shallow, it was very superficial, and unfortunately, it evaporates just as quickly as it started to come down. We're going to see that belief kind of go away. So they started to, but they didn't finish the race. In fact, the race ended very, very quickly. All because, by the way, they filtered the truth that Jesus spoke through their own uninformed opinions, through ideas that they had already gotten into their heads and refused to budge on based on incomplete information. And then when they were confronted with the truth, they were so invested in their position that they held, they wouldn't listen to it. They were closed off to it. So again, I'm hoping you're seeing all the parallels with everything we're seeing today. They were so invested in their position that they wouldn't even consider information that came in that challenged the position they held. They were like, absolutely not. I'm too invested with this position here. One uninformed opinion they held was this weird idea that they're free. Did you see that? They said, we've never been enslaved to anyone. Did you catch that line there? Jesus says to those who are starting to believe, he says, if you're truly my disciples, you'll abide in my words. Meaning, like, when he says abide, there's that word abide again. Abide. Meaning, you won't just believe, but you will actually persist in my teachings, and you will live in obedience to these teachings. He's talking about so much more than just belief. It's great that you're starting to believe, but he's saying if you're going to be truly my disciples, you're going to have to abide. You're going to have to remain in my words. You're going to have to back it up with action. He's telling them they have to do more than just believe. And a lot of people today have no problem whatsoever saying things like, I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. They say it with their words, but then their lifestyles say something completely different. And so Jesus is saying, belief by itself doesn't do anything. He's saying you have to abide in my words. And then he goes on in verse 32 to say, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So this is one of those verses that people love to quote. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. People that really don't even know much else about the Bible, a lot of them have at least heard that saying. A lot of people love to quote this. The problem is a lot of people quote it incorrectly. Jesus isn't talking about information. Jesus isn't talking about data. Because normally if you hear somebody say that, they're going to say it in the context of, if you know a lot of things, if you gather a lot of information, if you get educated, if you learn a lot, you will be free from ignorance. Like that's usually the implication of how people say that you'll be set free from ignorance. But some of the most ignorant people you will ever meet know a lot of stuff. So I'm going to push back against that a little bit. Simply filling your head with data, that's not what Jesus is talking about. And if you look at the context, that's clearly not what Jesus is talking about himself. Jesus is the truth. I'm the truth, he's saying. Jesus is the living embodiment of truth. In John 14:6, he's even going to go on to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is the truth. And the freedom he's talking about is freedom from the bondage of sin. If you know me, I'm the truth. If you know me, if you know this truth will set you free from your sin, from bondage to sin. That's been the whole context this whole time. And we're going to see in verse 34, he's going to make that very explicit that that's what he's talking about. Very explicit. He's going to say it point blank. And in the worst case of self-denial I have ever seen in my ever-loving life, they actually have the gall and the audacity to say, we have never been enslaved to anybody. And really? I mean, I guess if you don't count Egypt, Philistia, Ammon, Assyria, Babylon, Rome, if we don't count all of those countries, yeah, we've never been enslaved to anybody. Imagine a football coach saying, man, we shut out that other team. We shut them out today if you don't count their points. If you disregard their points, it was a shut. I mean, that's what they're doing there. I mean, let's not forget that every country we have ever dealt business with at some point has enslaved us. So, we've never been enslaved to anybody. Another Bible commentator I was reading this week, he calls that line right there, that quote, he calls this a superb disregard for the facts of the situation. I just thought that's a great way to put it. So, but this brings us to their second uninformed opinion about it's about their lineage. It's about their lineage. It's their second uninformed opinion. They think they get some kind of bonus points because they are descendants of Abraham. They think that gets them some kind of bonus points. Let me just make this point real blunt. You get no bonus points for where you were from. You get no bonus points based on who you belong to. Neither do you get points deducted from you for where you come from. We're accountable to God for ourselves and for what we do with the truth that He has given us, and that is Jesus Christ. And you don't gain points, you don't lose points based on where you come from or what family you belong to or anything like that. But they're like, we belong to Abraham. We're good. We don't have to worry about anything. We'll just get to God's house one day and say, yeah, we're Abraham's. And to which Jesus basically says, there's a big difference between being somebody's biological offspring and being their true son. There's a big difference between being the biological offspring of somebody, a biological descendant, and being a true son of that person. You may be Abraham's biological offspring, he says, but Abraham believed God when God spoke to him. Abraham uprooted his entire life when God spoke to him. Abraham changed his entire worldview when God spoke to him. Abraham left his homeland when God spoke to him. Abraham gave up his pagan roots when God spoke to him. Abraham believed all of the promises when God spoke to him. He says, you people have nothing in common with any of that. You people have more in common with your true father, the devil. He just straight up says, your dad's the devil. Your dad's the devil. He's been murdering and lying since the beginning of time, and now you're just like him. They're dealing in lies. They sit on a throne of lies. And lies are the domain of Satan. Satan's been lying from the beginning. First thing we ever really see him doing in the Bible is lying. Lying to Adam and Eve. And it's amazing, he was doing the same thing to them that he's doing to the Pharisees here, and he's still doing today. He's lying to try to get us to turn away from God. If I could just keep them from turning to God, if I could just keep them from believing they need God in their lives, I did my job. That's what he does. He deals in lies. Lies are the domain of Satan. And Jesus says, you're living in the domain of your father. Your father is Satan. And he tells them as much. And then in verse 43, why do you not understand what I say? And then he goes on, it is because you cannot bear to hear my word. You can't bear to hear my word. And then he continues in verse 45, and this is key. And I'm going to park a lot on this next statement, and I'm going to come back to it later. But this next statement here, he says, but because, and that word because, I'm going to make a big deal about that word in a little bit. Because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Not I tell you the truth and you don't believe me, as if it's just two things that happen to happen. He says, because I tell you the truth. I hope you're seeing this. And if you're not, let me just spell it out for you. The fact that it's the truth is the reason they don't want to hear it. Because it's the truth. People living in a lie will reject the truth for no other reason than because it is the truth. That is all the reason they need, oftentimes. And those who willfully reject the truth, those who, according to Jesus, have more in common and belong to Satan and not to God, they will often react forcefully and even violently when they encounter the truth, or those who speak the truth, as we'll see in verses 48 through 59. Let's read together and finish up this chapter here. 48 through 59. The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon." We'll come back to that Samaritan thing some other time, but I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. The Jews said to him, "Now we know you have a demon. Abraham died, as did the prophets. Yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? And the prophets died. Who do you make yourself out to be?" Jesus answered, If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father, Abraham, rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. So the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So we see finally, third warning, if you rely on violence and slander to neutralize the truth, you will end up on the wrong side of history. As a general rule, and I don't know about y'all, but I've been watching a lot more Charlie Kirk videos than lately than before, and I'm going to probably just bear with me. I'm probably just going to keep saying his name for many, many weeks to come. But I've been watching a lot of his videos, the full videos, not the out of context ones. And let me tell you something. And you see it in those videos, and you see it probably every day of your life. If you want to know who's winning a debate or who has the stronger argument, one key thing to listen for is which person is using rational argumentation and which person is just slinging insults and personal attacks and name calling. That's usually a really good sign about how that debate's going. Another commentator I studied this week had this quote about this. He said, name calling, and this is from a commentary written years ago, he said, name calling usually indicates that a person or group has run out of intelligent comments. So, you're a fascist. How can you say that? Because you're a racist. How can you say that? Because you're a fascist. Okay, is there a rational argument in here anywhere? Can we talk about that? So not only that, but when the victim doesn't give in to the slander and the name calling and all of those things, the person in the wrong will often resort to violence. We will see some sort of violent act to try to silence the other person. And again, I'm not talking about current events only. We see all of that right here in this chapter. We see all of this developing right here in these verses. The Jews called Jesus two of the worst names they can think of. They're so mad. They're like, you fascist? No, they weren't slinging that word around yet. They were like, you're a Samaritan. That was the first. I know, right? Like, what? But you know how much they hate Samaritans. Like, we've talked about how much they hate Samaritans. So they're like, what's the worst thing we could think of? You're a Samaritan. And then the second insult is, you're demon possessed. So Samaritans and demons, that was like the two worst things they could think of in that order. Apparently Samaritans rank higher than demons. But I also find it amusing that he just lets the Samaritan jab go. He's like, I'm gonna let that one slide. Like, whatever. He's like, I'm just gonna let that one go. And the irony here is they think they're so special because they're Abraham's descendants, but so are the Samaritans. Anyway, I love when people have no idea what they're talking about, but he does deny the demon possession charge. He does deny that one. And he tries to tell them again that if they would just fully place their faith in him, if they would do that all the way, their faith and their obedience, he says, you will not taste death. He's trying so hard to save them from dying, basically, from being in eternal damnation. He is trying so very hard, which just sets them off again. It just sets off another round. They say, now we know you have a demon. Abraham died. The prophets died. Are you greater than them? Which is actually a diabolical thing to say, considering that their ancestors are the ones who killed most of the prophets. And they're bringing that up like it's an argument. They died. You think you're better than them? And for the record, Jesus was never in this to exalt himself. Nowhere is he exalted. The only person he ever tried to exalt was the Father who sent him. That is the only person we ever see him trying to exalt. Jesus' whole life was humility and service and love and caring for people, not self-exaltation. But notice one thing. Notice this. The Pharisees are always trying to exalt themselves. The Pharisees are always trying to hold on to their public image and their prestige. So what they're doing, I would argue, is they are projecting all of their worst sins onto him. All of the things they're guilty of, they're saying he's doing it. And they're trying to tear him down for the very sin that they're the ones committing. But in just a second, the name calling is not going to be enough. The name calling didn't get the job done. Now we're about to see some violence. When Jesus remarks in verse 56 that Abraham rejoiced to see his day, they're like, you're not even 50 years old. How have you seen Abraham? How do you know this? And the reason they pick that exact number, 50, is the mindset there is you're not even old enough to be considered an elder in our community. How on earth do you have firsthand information of the patriarch of our nation who lived all these years ago? That's kind of what they're saying there. You can't even be ranked among the oldest of us. How are you going to tell us about Abraham? Jesus says, truly, truly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. Not before Abraham was, I was. Not past tense. But notice the construction of that sentence. It was past tense, present tense. I am. God has no beginning. God has no end. God is. God is. Before Abraham was, Jesus is. After we are all dead and gone, long after we're dead and gone, Jesus is. Do you get it? No beginning, no end. He is. He is. In Greek, ego, eimi. It is an emphatic statement. I am. I, emphasis on the I am. In Hebrew, Yahweh, which means the exact same thing. Which means, again, I am, which is God's personal name. God's name, and maybe there's some person or persons in here that never thought about this. God's name is not God. Just like my name is not pastor. God is God's title. God's name, his personal name, is I am. That's his name. It is the first person present tense being verb. He just is. I am. When Moses asked God what his name was, God said, I am. That is his name. That is his name. Jesus is calling himself by the very personal name of God right here. Jesus just called himself by the name, the holy name of God, that the Jews would not even say out loud because they were scared to misuse it. And he said, that's my name. I am. Anybody who ever tries to tell you that Jesus never claimed to be God, and there are those people out there, is either woefully uninformed or just plumb lying. Okay? Jesus could not have made himself any more clear. And the irony is this time, this is one of those times the Pharisees actually got what he was trying to say. And it was this. They got it loud and clear. Now oh, wait, what? And so the Pharisees resort to their favorite game, their favorite pastime. Let's get some stones. And they reach down and they start picking up stones. And I just have to wonder, were any of those stones the same stones they just dropped at the end of the last chapter? You know, just a thought. And so whatever fledgling belief that some of them may have been starting to get, we talked about in verse 30, whatever fledgling belief may have been starting to take hold, it's gone by verse 59. It's gone. First, they took his words out of context. Then they refused to listen to anything he said that did not line up with what they already believed. Then they started calling him names. Then they started projecting their own sins onto him. And when none of that worked, they tried to kill him. Yes, I would say this text speaks directly into everything we're seeing right now. So how on earth would you conclude a sermon like this? That's the question of the ages. I could make this political again. I could go there. I could point out that a lot of what I just said about Jesus is also how a lot of conservatives, people like Charlie Kirk are treated. A lot of that exact same treatment regularly, which would be true. Which would be true. But the fact is, that's not where I'm going to go. The fact is, it's actually true of every genuine Christ follower who takes a stand for their faith. Everyone. And if you have ever stood up for your faith, then some of those things on that list I just mentioned, you may have already been through yourself. Words out of context, projected, all of that. If you've ever stood up for your faith, you have probably been subjected to that also. You may not have had an attempt made against your life. I haven't, that I know of. If they did, they missed. But I have had my words twisted. I've had my words twisted. I've had my position on different issues misrepresented to other people. I've had that happen. I've been called names. I've had my character slandered. That's just from other brothers and sisters in the church. That's just from Christ followers. That's not even talking about outside the church. The more faithful you are to Jesus, the more you'll have these kinds of experiences too. And so I just want to just let you know. The more you stand up for Jesus, the more you will have these kinds of experiences. There will come. There will come. The key thing to remember, though, when you do walk through these experiences, the key thing I want you to remember is they did all the same things to Jesus. All the exact same things. Every one of them. I mean, we just read a moment ago that there will always be those who hate the truth for no other reason than because it is the truth. No other reason. That's all the reason they need. And they did all the same things to Jesus. We read back in John chapter 3, when Jesus was talking to Nicodemus. We read, "The light has come into the world, And people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. They just prefer the darkness. They just prefer the lies. In John chapter 15, verses 18 through 21, which we'll get to probably in a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, during a very long discourse that Jesus is telling the disciples, when we get there, we're going to read this. We're going to read this. This is what Jesus is going to tell his disciples, the people who knew him the best and followed him the closest. He's going to say, if the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they'll also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. So Jesus said, they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. Just be ready for it. And I know, but here's the thing. I know that sounds bleak, and I know that sounds like, oh my gosh, that's so tragic. But here's the crazy thing. Jesus meant it to be encouraging. He was telling them that to encourage them and to build them up. I know that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but he was preparing them for something that was coming, and he was trying to give them the proper perspective on it, because he goes on just a little while later in chapter 16, just a few verses later, as part of that same discourse, he goes on to say this. I do not have a slide for this, so you're just going to have to listen. But he says, I have said these things to you, these things, that in me you may have peace. Your peace doesn't come from your circumstances. So the fact that they're persecuting you, that's not the point. Your peace is in me. He said, I tell you those things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. That's the point of him saying all of this. Is your peace and your security is not in the world. So yeah, they're going to persecute you. They persecuted me because we don't belong to the world. So expect the persecution. Find your peace in me, because here's the fun fact. I've overcome the world. That's what he's saying. So I win. That's what he's saying. So just know that we're not going to win over everybody. We're going to spit truth, and there will be people that it is just going to bounce off of like Kevlar armor. Boom! Like they're just, it's not even going to land. We're not going to win over not everyone will see the light. Pun intended. Not everyone will see it. We will be hated. And many are going to hate us for no other reason than because the words that come out of our mouth are truth. That is the only reason they're going to need. I know when people hate us, we want to rationalize and we want to try to process why. Literally, sometimes that's the only reason. It's because it was truth. And I know that right now, with everything that's going on, everything that we see going on around us, it may seem like it's worse than ever. I don't know if you've thought that in the last few weeks. Oh man, it's worse than ever. Look at the chaos. Look at all this. But hear me. It's not. It is not worse than ever. Some of our brothers and sisters in the faith were thrown to lions, and people cheered by the thousands as they were ripped into pieces. It is not worse than ever. We're just sensitive right now. We're just a little sensitive, but it is not worse than ever. Keep this in mind. Do keep in mind persecution, ridicule, scorn. These are not signs that we are losing. These are signs that we are winning. These are signs that we're winning. You would not call Jesus' ministry a failure. You would never say Jesus failed. And he was ridiculed, mocked, persecuted, made fun of, and slandered more than anybody. You would not call his ministry a failure, though. And yet, the worst thing they thought they could do to him, the absolute worst thing they could come up with to do to him, which was to kill him, was actually the way that he won. So we just looked at a bunch of ways to end up on the wrong side of history. Let me give you one surefire way to end up on the right side of history. Confess faith in Jesus Christ if you have never done so. Confess faith to follow him. Commit yourself fully to his lordship. Do not shy away from truth just because it is truth and because it is uncomfortable or because it is scary. Because here's the thing, Jesus is not just winning, Jesus has won. Jesus has won. We're not trying to scramble up the field for a last-second touchdown. We're running out the clock. Jesus has won. It's already done. He's on the right side of history. Jesus is on the right side of history. And for his church, and for those of us who truly belong to the church and have truly professed faith in him and belong to him and belong to the church, we're on the right side of the church of history with him.